Ohio, stabbed 22-year-old Michael Morris during a heated fight at Wildwood Park. Michael Morris was from Alliance, Ohio. This chance meeting at the park took his life and ruined Marissa's. Court records show the confrontation began as a dispute between groups at the park. Just words at first, but it turned physical fast. A 15-year-old friend gave Marissa the knife. Exactly what happened next was picked apart by everyone during the intense criminal trial. Investigators knew for sure that Marissa used that knife to deliver a lethal blow to Michael's chest. Michael was rushed to the local hospital but didn't make it. Police caught Marissa right away. The 15-year-old accomplice was arrested too. That younger teen faced juvenile court for helping out. The murder weapon was found. Witnesses soon started telling the police what they really saw. The probe moved fast as prosecutors built a case against Marissa for Michael's tragic passing. During legal proceedings, Marissa's defense team tried to argue self-defense. They said she reacted to a threat, but prosecutors didn't buy it, focusing on her aggression. They showed the jury that Marissa had several other choices in those final moments. She could have walked away or called for help. Instead, she chose to use the knife. Why does an argument turn into a killing? The trial started May 2023. It only lasted 4 days. The jury heard from everyone who was at the park. They looked at the knife and heard medical experts explain why Michael's injury was impossible to survive. The defense told their side of the story, but the state's evidence was just too strong. After deliberating, the jury found her guilty of murder and causing serious felonious harm. Judge Natalie Hopt handled the sentencing. She gave Marissa life in prison with parole after 15 years. At the sentencing, the judge spoke out about Marissa's terrible choices. She pointed out that Marissa left Michael to die without even trying to call help. Walking away instead of helping was a huge factor for the judge. Michael's family watched the trial. They gave statements about their painful loss. One relative said every one of them felt like their own life ended that day. The room was heavy. No sentence could restore what was lost. Marissa Smith remains in prison in 2026. She is eligible for parole in 2037. This case highlighted youth violence. But our next story involves a much more cold and calculated act. Daphne Abdella. In 1997, New York's Central Park was the site of a truly horrific crime. 15-year-old Daphne Abdella and Christopher Vasquez met 44-year-old Michael McMorrow late that evening. This random encounter ended with Michael's body in a lake, covered in over 30 deep knife wounds. Daphne and Christopher were rollerblading and drinking in the park. They met Michael McMorrow while out. Daphne later claimed Michael gave them drugs, specifically mentioning LSD. She said it caused hallucinations. Still, the real trigger for the violence is a mystery. The attack on Michael was brutal. His body showed signs of torture that went far beyond what was needed to kill him. In a dark twist, the body was mutilated to make it sink beneath the water. Daphne was the one who suggested doing this. Later, police found the pair bathing together. Their clothes were soaked in blood. Instead of running, Daphne called the authorities herself. On the phone, she tried to pin everything on Christopher, acting like she was just a witness. Physical evidence told a different story. Both teens had Michael's blood on their clothes. Both took part in the vicious attack. Forensic facts made it impossible to believe Daphne's lies. Police arrested them both immediately. The motive stayed unclear during the entire investigation and trial. Prosecutors suggested motives ranging from pure thrill seeking to blind rage. Nothing was stolen. There was no link between the teenagers and Michael before that night. Why attack a complete stranger? The random nature of the target made this true crime case even more unsettling. Some thought drugs might have played a part, though that didn't excuse their violent actions. The extreme level of violence pointed to something beyond simple bad judgment. To avoid a full trial and having to testify, Daphne took a plea deal in 1998. She pleaded guilty to manslaughter to dodge heavier charges. This let her stay silent about the grim details of what happened that night. Christopher Vasquez stood trial and was also found guilty of manslaughter. The plea bargain gave Daphne a sentence that considered her age, but still held her accountable. In later court dates, she showed deep remorse. She said she could never truly put her sorrow for those events into words. Her words felt real, but they couldn't fix the damage. She served 6 years and was out by 2004. After her release, Daphne tried to start over in New York. She kept a very low profile. In 2009, an accident left her needing a cane. As of 2026, she lives a quiet life. This next case still has massive questions even today. We are talking about Norah Jackson. In June 2005, 18-year-old Norah Jackson found her mother Jennifer dead in their Memphis home. Jennifer had been stabbed many times. The house was a mess and looked like it had been ransacked. Things were tossed all over the house. For Norah, seeing her mother like that was incredibly traumatic. Police soon labeled her the main suspect, even though the actual evidence raised serious questions. The murder investigation was messy from the jump. Jennifer's father had actually been killed just a year earlier in a cold case. People wondered if there was a connection. The ransacking suggested a break-in by someone looking for something specific. Many rooms were a wreck. Still, the police put their focus squarely on Norah. They saw typical teenage drama between mother and daughter. They also claimed the inheritance could have been the motive. The case was built on circumstantial theories, instead of hard physical evidence or forensics. Forensics told a different story than the prosecutors. DNA tests found genetic material from several people at the crime scene. None of that DNA belonged to Norah. The forensic evidence pointed toward unknown intruders being there. Fingerprints from strangers were found. This physical proof pointed away from Norah rather than making her look guilty. Even so, the prosecutors moved forward with the charges. They leaned on testimony from Norah's friend, Andrew Hammock. He claimed she made suspicious comments to him. His testimony was the backbone of the state's case. The 2009 trial ended with her defense team calling 0 witnesses. This strange strategy failed completely. The jury found her guilty of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to a long time in prison. Can you be convicted without any physical evidence? Secrets kept from the jury would eventually get this verdict overturned. Prosecutors had hidden vital information. Key witness Andrew Hammock wrote a letter admitting he was high during his testimony. He confessed that his statements to the court couldn't be trusted. The defense never saw this letter. The state violated Norah's rights by hiding evidence that could have proven her innocence. In 2014, the conviction was overturned because of prosecutorial misconduct. After 11 years in prison, Norah had a choice: face another trial or enter what's called an Alford plea. This plea lets you maintain your innocence while admitting the state has enough evidence for a conviction. Norah took the Alford plea for manslaughter, a lesser charge than murder, just to get her freedom immediately. She was freed in August 2016 and is now a dedicated advocate for the wrongly convicted. Norah has always maintained her innocence. The Innocence Project is now on her case. New DNA testing might finally reveal who was really in that house. That unidentified DNA is still a mystery. Genetic material from several people was found right there, but Norah's DNA wasn't there. For Jennifer Jackson's family, this case still feels completely unresolved. For Norah, those 11 stolen years can never be given back. This next case involves premeditation that truly shocked investigators. Meet Scarlett Jenkinson. In February 2023, 15-year-old Scarlett Jenkinson and her friend Eddie Ratcliffe launched a calculated assault in a Warrington park. Their target was 16-year-old Briana Ghey, a transgender girl who went to school nearby. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment event. It was cold and deeply calculated. Text messages between Scarlett and Eddie proved they hand-picked Briana and rehearsed exactly what they would do. The attack happened in Colchester Linear Park. The pair lured Briana there under the guise of just hanging out. Once they arrived, they ambushed her. Briana was stabbed 28 times in total. It was a brutal, sustained assault. She never had a chance. Later, passers-by stumbled upon her body in the grass. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community, sparking an immediate police manhunt. Police fast-tracked Scarlett and Eddie as suspects. Digital evidence ended up being the smoking gun. Detectives found messages between the teens detailing their plot. They had clearly discussed targeting Briana. They debated methods. The text showed chilling premeditation. This was no simple argument that got out of hand. This was a cold-blooded plan in motion. Those messages became the foundation of the prosecution's entire case. What drives children to plot such a thing? The investigation pulled back the curtain on dark motivations. Hard evidence suggested that Briana's identity as a transgender girl played a key role. The texts were filled with bias and hatred. The case forced a national conversation on identity-based violence. Beyond that, experts noted a disturbing curiosity in the teens, a desire to cause pain just for the thrill. The plotting, the choice of target, and the sheer brutality pointed toward a deeply fractured state of mind. Both Scarlett and Eddie were soon arrested and charged. The trial picked through every detail. Prosecutors laid out the digital trail, proving the attack was planned. Forensics experts testified about the violence. Meanwhile, the defense tried to shift the blame between the two teens. Both defendants claimed the other was the real mastermind behind the murder. Yet the proof was clear: they both planned it. Both were there, and both acted together. Guilty on all counts, Scarlett Jenkinson got life, with at least 22 years before she can see parole. Eddie Ratcliffe received a similar life sentence, serving a minimum of 20 years. The judge focused on how calculated the attack was, and how vulnerable poor Briana had been. These sentences balanced the sheer horror of the crime against the fact that the killers were only kids. Briana Ghey's family was there. Speaking of the girl, they lost a girl who was finally living her truth. She had struggles, but she was looking toward a bright future. This tragedy sparked a huge debate on protecting youth from bias. Now, Scarlett and Eddie will spend their best years behind bars. That park is now a memorial. But our next case shifts from hatred to cold, hard cash. Katherine Bellflower. In June 2002, in Alamo County, California, 17-year-old Katherine Bellflower joined a plot to end 17-year-old Jenna Nanetti's life. Jenna was blasted with a shotgun in what initially looked like a completely random street crime. But as investigators dug deeper, they realized her passing was far from accidental. It was actually a cold-blooded scheme designed to cash in on a life insurance policy. Katherine's boyfriend was the mastermind. The motive they uncovered was simple, yet absolutely horrifying. Jenna had a life insurance policy, and if she died, there was a massive payout waiting. Katherine and her boyfriend plotted to kill Jenna for the cash, dreaming up a plan to make it look like a random tragedy. That shotgun blast was simply a distraction to hide their true motives. While police scoured Jenna's life, they found the policy and started looking for anyone who might profit from her death. This trail led straight to Katherine and her boyfriend, making the dark connection between them undeniable. They weren't strangers. That insurance policy linked them together in a very dangerous way. Once investigators checked their communications and movements that day, the evidence of a conspiracy was everywhere. What looked like a random shooting was actually a cold, premeditated hit for profit. Could anyone really kill a friend for money? Investigators found Katherine was right in the middle of those planning meetings. Call logs, witness accounts, and forensics all highlighted her dark role. Her boyfriend might have pulled the trigger, but Katherine was the architect. She knew exactly what was coming and helped pave the way. Under California law, those secret talks made her just as guilty. To avoid a public trial in the mountain of evidence, she faced charges for a life taken during that insurance plot. Katherine eventually took a plea deal, admitting her guilt in Jenna's tragic death. By pleading, she officially confessed to her part in the entire conspiracy. It was a final admission of responsibility for the tragedy. The deal offered a guaranteed sentence, avoiding the risk of a jury hearing the truly horrific details of the planning and execution. In July 2005, a judge sentenced Katherine to 25 years to life. The harsh sentence fit the cold, financial motive. Even the judge pointed out the sickening betrayal of a supposed friend. Jenna trusted Katherine. She never imagined her own friend was secretly plotting a deadly conspiracy against her. The Nettie family was there in court, sharing the heartbreak of their loss. Jenna was only 17, same as Katherine. A whole lifetime of dreams, gone in an instant. Knowing she died for nothing but pure financial greed made the grief so much harder to bear. By 2022, Katherine walked free on parole, thanks to a California law rethinking life sentences for juvenile offenders. As of 2026, she is out of prison and living under strict parole supervision. Our next story is a messy one, filled with disputed facts and innocence. Shanda Crane. In 1995, Louisiana convicted Shanda for her parents' deaths, but the case was clouded by claims of intense coercion. Through the entire trial, Shanda maintained she was innocent. Prosecutors argued the motive was pure greed, claiming Shanda was right there planning what happened to her parents. They brought in testimony from other people who were actually at the scene. Her defense told a different story. They said she was forced into it, acting under extreme pressure from the real instigators. They showed evidence that her actual role was tiny and completely forced. Lawyers argued her young age made her an easy target for manipulation by older people who held all the power. Her team tried to portray her as a victim caught in a storm she couldn't escape. But the prosecution fired back. It didn't matter who started it. Shanda knew what was happening and took part anyway. They argued she had plenty of chances to walk away or call for help. They showed the jury proof that she was much deeper in it than she admitted. Witnesses took the stand to describe everything that happened before and after her parents were killed. After looking at the forensics and recovered messages, the jury came back with a guilty verdict. Shanda got life. It was a heavy sentence that reflected the total gravity of taking her own parents' lives. Still, people have been questioning the fairness of that conviction for decades now. Her supporters have highlighted some major red flags in how the original trial went down. They wonder if all the evidence came out, and if the judge truly considered how young she was back then. Is it possible for a teenager to be wrongfully convicted through pure coercion? Recently, Shanda filed for clemency, arguing that her entire conviction was a mistake. The petition focuses on the forced confession and the lack of real proof against her. Her plea has gained momentum from people who see this as a massive miscarriage of justice. Her fans point to her unwavering story and the shaky evidence that sent her away. Not everyone agrees, though. Many still believe the original conviction was solid and that the jury made the right call based on everything they heard. The fight for clemency has turned into a heated battle between both sides. After a successful clemency push and a deep look into the forced nature of her 1995 interrogation, Shanda was paroled and walked free in early 2024. Over the last 2 years, she has focused on reuniting with family and pushing for interrogation reforms. This case is still incredibly painful, no matter the debate over Shanda's actual level of involvement. They lost people they loved and have endured the fallout of those deaths for decades now. The clemency petition reopened old wounds while forcing a serious look at what justice means for young offenders. Our next case involves serious mental health struggles during a sudden family crisis. Heather Marie Dowst. In January 2008 in Poway, California, 14-year-old Heather attacked her mother with a hammer. This happened during what family members called a period of extreme, ongoing tension in the home. Rebecca Dowst did not survive. Heather's adoptive father was also badly hurt during the attack, but he managed to survive. Those tragic events left Heather facing serious charges, with her mental state becoming central to figuring out what happened. The Dowst family adopted Heather at a young age, but by her teens, the home was full of challenges. Arguments happened more and more often. Relatives later spoke about a clear pattern of escalating conflict. On that fateful day, a fight turned physical. Heather grabbed a hammer from somewhere inside the house. What followed was a brutal attack. Rebecca suffered fatal wounds after being struck multiple times with the heavy tool. When Heather's father tried to step in and stop her, he was also hit with the hammer. He survived his wounds but had to watch his wife die. Police arrived to find Rebecca gone and the father bleeding. Paramedics treated the father right there at the scene before rushing him to a nearby hospital for help. Heather was arrested without a fight. Detectives then focused on how a simple family argument could escalate into such an extreme act of violence. What exactly drives a family fight to such a breaking point? Psychological evaluations quickly became a vital part of the upcoming legal proceedings. Experts examined Heather to determine her state of mind during the attack. These tests revealed deep, significant mental health issues. These medical findings heavily influenced how the case would move forward. While they didn't excuse the violence, they gave context to why Heather did what she did. The law recognizes that kids with mental health issues might carry different levels of legal responsibility than healthy adults do. Instead of going to trial, Heather took a deal and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. This plea deal meant admitting what she did without the trauma of a very public, detailed trial. It also let the court take her psychological struggles into account during the final sentencing. The plea meant taking responsibility for Rebecca's death while acknowledging the complicated circumstances of that day. The judge sentenced Heather to 16 years to life in prison. This sentence reflected the severity of her actions alongside her youth and psychological status. She would start her sentence in a juvenile center before being moved to an adult prison once she turned 18. The sentence meant she'd spend at least 16 years behind bars before she could even ask for parole. She would be in her 30s before that possibility ever came up. For Heather's father, the grief was overwhelming. His own daughter had been the one to take his wife away. He survived the physical attack, but he lost his entire family in almost every other way. This case raised huge questions about mental health support for adopted kids and the struggles families face with mental illness. Heather Marie Dowst was finally granted parole in 2024 after serving 16 years of her life sentence. She was released later that year and is now a free citizen, focusing on her passion for writing. If you have made it this far and enjoy deep dives into shocking criminal cases, hit subscribe and ring that bell icon for daily updates. Our next case follows a forbidden relationship taken to a deadly extreme. This is Ashley Jones. In August 1999, 14-year-old Ashley Jones and her boyfriend Jeremy Hart executed a plan that ended 3 lives. The victims were Ashley's grandparents and her aunt. All 3 of them had openly disapproved of the couple's relationship. For Ashley and Jeremy, that disapproval was something they decided they could no longer tolerate. The couple stayed together despite major family objections. His grandparents, who were raising him, believed the relationship was toxic and harmful. They wanted the romance to end, and his aunt fully supported them. The 2 teenagers began to see these family members as simple obstacles to their love. Instead of accepting the new rules, they plotted to remove the obstacles for good. The planning was slow, and they debated every method. They braced themselves mentally for the violence. Then, on that day, Ashley and Jeremy finally put their dark plan into motion. Arming themselves with a knife and a gun, their attack was long and calculated. They targeted each victim individually. Both of Ashley's grandparents were shot dead, while her aunt, Mary Knowles, survived being shot and badly burned during the assault. The crime scene showed a desperate struggle against overwhelming force. The victims simply stood no chance while trying to defend themselves against 2 attackers. Could family disapproval really spark such extreme violence? Ashley and Jeremy fled right after the murders. Police tracked them to a hotel and arrested them with a mountain of evidence. Forensic tests linked them to the house, and witnesses placed them at the scene. Their motive was obvious based on statements they made before and after the killings. During the police investigation, Garam was quoted telling one of the victims, "This is how you are going to die." This cold statement proved the murders were premeditated. The trial would soon examine every piece of evidence. Ashley was only 14 years old when the crime happened. Under Alabama law, she faced trial as an adult for these serious charges. Prosecutors argued it was a calculated plan by 2 people who knew exactly what they were doing. Her defense tried to argue that her age and relationship with Jeremy should lead to mercy. They suggested she was just under his dark influence, but the evidence proved she was an active participant. Ashley Jones was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sentencing a 14-year-old to life sparked massive debates. Her case became central to the conversation about juvenile justice. Eventually, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on cases where children were sentenced to life without parole. They questioned if these sentences were constitutional for offenders under 18. Ashley's case was often cited in these legal debates. For the victims' families, the loss was truly devastating. 3 lives were stolen just because they tried to set boundaries for a rebellious teen. They only wanted to protect her from a toxic relationship. Instead of listening, the 2 teenagers turned on them in the worst way possible. Ashley Jones is still locked up at the Julia Tutwiler prison, but she was sentenced to life with parole following the Miller versus Alabama ruling. This Alabama ruling makes her eligible for a parole hearing in the very near future. Another case shows the intersection between legal reform and repeated criminal violations. In October 1993, 14-year-old Ruth Ann the Fifth stabbed 66-year-old Catherine Haynes in Iowa. Catherine was home when Ruth Ann broke in. It started as a robbery, but turned deadly. Ruth Ann stabbed Catherine repeatedly. The elderly woman couldn't defend herself, and she eventually died from her injuries. This case became famous not just for the murder, but for the shocking events over the next decades. Police found that Ruth Ann had broken into Catherine's home with the clear intent to steal. When she was discovered, things escalated quickly. Ruth Ann pulled a knife and launched a sustained, brutal attack. Catherine suffered many stab wounds. The brutality was shocking, especially considering Ruth Ann was only a child. Detectives tried to understand what drove a 14-year-old to commit such violence. Background checks showed Ruth Ann had a hard life, with a history that strongly suggested past mistreatment. Ruth Ann was arrested and charged with Catherine's murder. She was convicted, and her sentence reflected the crime's severity. She was sentenced to life. At the time, there was little concern for the fact she was only 14. Under Iowa law, that life sentence was mandatory for the conviction she received. Ruth Ann spent years in prison, maturing from a young girl into a woman behind bars. How do you move on from crimes committed as a kid? Later, new sentencing reforms began to change the path for cases like Ruth Ann's. The U.S. Supreme Court eventually banned automatic life sentences without parole for juvenile offenders. These rulings acknowledged that young people have a much higher chance of rehabilitation than adults do. They realized that brains keep developing into the 20s, and teen decisions don't always reflect a person's permanent character. These legal reforms gave Ruth Ann a second chance she never would have had otherwise. Ruth Ann finally became eligible for parole. Behind bars, she took part in several prison programs and claimed to feel deep remorse. Later, she finally admitted how brutal her crime really was. Eventually, the board granted her parole. This meant a supervised release with very tight strings attached. For a while, Ruth Ann seemed fine. Placed in work release, she started making moves to build a real life outside those prison walls. But then, Ruth Ann went and blew her parole terms. She failed to follow basic supervision rules. And when you break parole, you go right back to a cell. Her freedom was revoked instantly. Sent back to finish her time, her next attempt at parole was rejected. The board didn't forget those violations when they made the final call. By 2026, Ruth Ann the Fifth finally finished her parole. Discharged in late 2025, her long sentence for that 1993 incident is officially over. Our next case shifts to modern tech and a calculated plot. German Lewis. October 2022, Baton Rouge. 16-year-old German Lewis plotted online with Dwayne Barfield to execute her own mother, Marissa Stone. This case shocked everyone, showing how modern tech can help turn a dark plan into reality. Jermaine and Dwayne used digital apps to discuss their intent and coordinate the plan that ended Marissa's life. Things were tense between Jermaine and her mother. The family friction had been boiling over for months. German was fed up with her mother's strict rules. Instead of finding help, she hopped online with Dwayne Barfield. Their chats quickly moved from venting to actual planning. They figured out exactly how to attack Marissa, coordinating the timing and the method of execution. That digital paper trail became the smoking gun. On the day it happened, Dwayne headed to the house where Jermaine lived. Marissa was shot. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, but she just did not make it. Detectives started digging immediately. They checked everyone at the house and hunted for a clear motive. The investigation pointed a finger at Dwayne Barfield very fast. Once they checked his phone, they found the messages with German. Those texts laid out the entire plot. Why would someone plot their own mother's death? German was charged with principal to second-degree murder. This meant that even without pulling the trigger, she was the one who planned and facilitated the crime. The evidence against her was massive. Digital records showed clear intent. They even caught the two discussing the motive. They coordinated Dwayne's arrival at the home. The prosecution had an airtight case because technology preserved every single detail of their conspiracy. Instead of going to trial, Jermaine took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty, finally admitting her role in the conspiracy and the tragic death of her own mother. In exchange for that plea, the defense and prosecution worked out a deal on her final sentence. Jermaine got life, but unlike most life terms, this one offered parole after serving 25 years behind bars. The sentence balanced the horror of the crime with the fact that Jermaine was still just a child. At 16, she was old enough to understand the weight of her actions, but the law still saw potential for her to change. Being eligible in 25 years means that by her early 40s, Jermaine can try to prove she is truly rehabilitated. Whether she actually gets out depends on her behavior in prison and if the board thinks she is still a danger. For Marissa Stone's grieving family, that digital evidence was a double-edged sword, offering a gut-wrenching look at how their loved one was betrayed. They saw the chats, the planning, and the cold deliberation. It made the loss almost impossible to to process. Today, German Lewis remains in prison. She won't be eligible for a parole hearing until 2047. It is a grim reminder of how family fights can spiral and how tech leaves a permanent record of every plot. Our next case involves a cold-blooded contract meant to dodge responsibility. Amy Lynn Meyer. March 1997, Lancaster. 16-year-old Amy Lynn hired Billy Hoffman to murder her boyfriend, Ricky Cowes. Amy was pregnant back then. She blamed Ricky for ruining her life. Instead of asking for help or using the law, she arranged to have him killed. This investigation dragged on for years, ultimately leading to one of the most severe sentences ever given to a teenage girl. Amy offered Billy Hoffman a deadly deal. She wanted Ricky dead. Amy offered cash and favors, and Billy agreed to do the job. On that fateful day, Billy tracked Ricky down and jumped him. He beat him badly before pulling the trigger. It was a savage, relentless assault. Ricky was dumped and eventually found, but doctors were unable to save his life. Detectives couldn't find any leads at first. The murder investigation went cold for several years. Detectives didn't realize Amy was the one pulling the strings. She simply went home and raised the child Ricky had fathered. She acted like she was innocent. Years went by while the case sat gathering dust. Suddenly, the investigation caught a break. New witnesses finally stepped forward with crucial information. Billy Hoffman was caught and put in handcuffs. Under questioning, he ratted out Amy and detailed their secret deal. He told police Amy was the one who wanted Ricky dead. How could she plan this and then live normally? Amy was arrested years after Ricky passed. By then, she was already an adult. But the charges were for things she did at 16. At trial, the jury looked at every piece of evidence. Billy Hoffman took the stand to testify. Other witnesses backed up his story about the murder for hire. Prosecutors argued that Amy truly hated the victim, highlighting the deep personal grudge that fueled the whole conspiracy. Her lawyers tried to claim she was just a kid who made a horrible mistake while under a lot of pressure. The jury convicted Amy of murder in 2007, an entire decade after the crime actually took place. During sentencing, the judge weighed the brutal nature of the killing against the fact that Amy was so young. Even though she was a minor, the court handed down a sentence of life in prison without parole. It was the absolute toughest sentence the law would allow. This meant Amy would die in prison. The judge felt her cold, calculated planning deserved nothing less than a life term. This wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't some impulsive, split-second mistake. Instead, she carefully planned, negotiated, and paid someone else to carry out the hit. Hiring a hitman made the murder especially cold. The court decided this calculated cruelty outweighed her status as a minor. As of 2026, Amy Lynn P.M.er is a free citizen today, having been granted parole and released from prison in 2022 under California youth laws. For Ricky Cowes' family, waiting 10 years for justice was pure torture. When she was finally convicted, they felt some relief. But knowing she lived a normal life while they mourned only made their heartbreak so much worse. This case proved that some crimes, even those done by kids, carry permanent consequences that never go away. Our next case involves a shocking act driven by mental health issues. The story of Delilah Sherwood Evans. On Christmas Day 2016 in Michigan, 17-year-old Delilah Sherwood Evans stabbed her mother, Sonia Rion, 120 times. Sonia was in a wheelchair, unable to defend herself or escape. The home attack became one of the most disturbing cases in history because of the brutal assault and how vulnerable the poor victim was. The investigation raised massive questions about mental health and the dark side of family dynamics. Delilah and her mother were always fighting. These family arguments just kept getting worse and worse over time. Then came Christmas Day, a time for joy. Instead, the family tension finally reached a violent breaking point. Delilah grabbed a knife and began a relentless assault. She stabbed Sonia over and over again. The sheer number of wounds suggested absolute rage or a total loss of control. Experts later confirmed many wounds were inflicted after Sonia was already incapacitated. When paramedics finally arrived at the house, they found Sonia already dead. The crime scene was a horror show. The violence of the attack even shocked veteran police officers. Delilah was immediately taken into custody. During questioning, it was obvious her mental health was a huge factor. Her strange behavior showed she was in the middle of a major crisis. People weren't just asking what happened, they were asking what could drive a girl to such extreme violence. How does our legal system deal with cases where severe mental illness leads to such horrific harm? Delilah went through multiple psych evaluations. Doctors spent hours studying her mental state. Psych evaluations uncovered deep mental health issues. These findings eventually shifted the entire direction of the case. Under Michigan law, a jury can return a verdict of guilty, but mentally ill to address these situations. This specific verdict confirms the person committed the crime while acknowledging that mental illness played a massive role. It mandates treatment during prison time while still holding the offender accountable for their actions. Ultimately, the trial ended with Delilah being found guilty but mentally ill. The court weighed the brutal reality of what happened to Sonia against the mental struggles behind Delilah's actions. First sentenced to life without parole, Delilah Evans saw her conviction overturned in 2020. By late 2023, she took a plea deal for 20 to 40 years, including time already served. In 2026, talk of a retrial surfaced, but Delilah stays behind bars as legal proceedings continue. Another case would eventually result in release and a real second chance. Valessa Robinson. In June 1998, 15-year-old Valessa Robinson, her boyfriend, and a friend murdered her mother, Vicki Robinson, in Tampa, Florida. It was a brutal attack involving choking, toxic injections, and stabbing. The motive was Valessa's desperate wish to stay with her boyfriend. Vicki had tried to split them up, believing the relationship was incredibly toxic and harmful. Instead of accepting the breakup, Valessa helped plan and execute the murder of her own mother. Valessa was dating an older boy whom Vicki saw as a bad influence, leading to constant concern. Vicki set hard boundaries and tried to keep them apart, but Valessa saw only control, not protection. She started spending all her time with her boyfriend and his friend. Together, the three of them plotted against Vicki. Those dark talks soon turned into a murder plan. They decided killing Vicki was their only solution. The assault was relentless, using multiple methods to end her life. They injected bleach into her and stabbed her. The sheer overkill showed a desperate determination to make sure she died. After Vicki passed, the trio scrambled to cover up what they had done. They hid the body and cooked up a story to explain why Vicki had disappeared. But investigators soon found holes in their story. Physical evidence contradicted their lies. Can a teen truly grasp the permanence of killing a parent? All three were arrested. Despite being 15, Valessa faced heavy charges for her clear role in the plot. She was there for the murder, part of the planning, and helped hide the evidence afterward. The trial focused on the ringleader. Her defense claimed Valessa was just brainwashed by her older boyfriend. Prosecutors fired back, arguing she was an active participant in the murder. She was convicted of third-degree murder. The lesser charge reflected her age and specific level of involvement. She received a 15-year prison sentence. She would serve time with a chance for release later. While locked up, Valessa stayed active in prison programs. She got an education and went to counseling. Records show she used that time to understand what led her there. Back in 1998, she finally showed remorse for her mother's death. Valessa Robinson walked free in 2013 and immediately started working to rebuild her shattered life. She reconnected with loyal family members and eventually became a mother herself later on. In post-release interviews, she called her life good, expressing gratitude for the second chance she had received. She acknowledged the tragedy but kept her focus entirely on moving forward. Her case became a rare success story for juvenile rehab. She committed a heinous crime at 15. She served her time, finished rehab, and successfully reintegrated back into society after her release. She did not reoffend. She actually built a real life. After years of freedom, Valessa was arrested in 2021 for a DUI and property damage, showing her journey was not over. Our final case involves a dark conspiracy between two classmates, Anakah Stelchinsky. In November 2020, 17-year-old Anakah Stelchinsky and Noah Sharp lured their classmate Madison Sparrow into the woods in Delaware. Madison was beaten so badly she didn't survive. The motive? Just petty rumors and teenage drama gone horribly wrong. The case left the small town completely stunned. It raised huge questions about how fast school fights turned deadly without any adults stepping in. Anakah and Noah were Madison's classmates. Tensions were high, and the rumor mill was working overtime. Things simmered. Instead of letting school drama fade, Anakah and Noah started working on a dark plan. They chose to confront Madison head-on, making sure to lure her away alone. They picked a wooded spot where no one would see. The plan was built on lies and teamwork. When the day came, they successfully tricked Madison into going to that specific spot. Once in the woods and away from witnesses, they attacked. Madison was beaten again and again. The assault was brutal and lasted a long time. She never stood a chance against two people. Her injuries were too much to survive. After finishing, Anakah and Noah just walked away. Her body was found later. Police launched an investigation right away. How does school drama turn into murder? Detectives scrambled to see who Madison was with that day. The investigation soon uncovered private messages between Anakah and Noah. Phone data proved they planned it. Witnesses saw them with her. DNA tied them to the woods. The evidence piled up fast. Both teenagers were soon arrested and hit with serious charges. Their lawyers saw how strong the proof was. Facing a mountain of evidence, both teens accepted plea deals instead of going to a public trial. Anakah Stelchinsky pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. She also admitted to weapon charges and conspiracy for her part in the 2020 attack on Madison Sparrow. In exchange for the plea, prosecutors asked for a specific sentence: 30 years behind bars. That sentence is set in stone. There is no chance of early parole for her at all. The judge signed off on the deal and handed down the 30-year sentence. While in court, the Attorney General of Delaware spoke out about the case. They described the crime as incredibly twisted and beyond words. This statement reflected how shocked the whole community felt. Madison was a classmate and a peer. The fact that her own friends planned this attack left everyone deeply disturbed. People began asking what red flags everyone might have missed. Could this have been stopped if adults were watching? For Madison Sparrow's family, the loss is just unbearable. Their daughter was gone because of a school fight that spiraled into something unimaginable. Knowing it was premeditated rather than just a sudden fight makes it even harder to handle. Madison was hunted. They purposefully lured her to a spot where she had no way to escape. The level of calculation they used just does not match typical teenage school drama. As of 2026, Anakah Stelchinsky is still in a Delaware prison serving her 30 years. By the time she gets out, she will be in her late 40s. That is all for today. Thanks for watching. Click here to see another video.